Amber mentioned, this is going to be a lot of tips and tricks, and there is a handout with all of them listed. So the best way to handle the questions is just to note the item that you are interested in learning more about, and then you can ask your question toward the end. We will go through all the questions, or as many as we can get to. These tips and tricks, a lot of them were presented at previous Microsoft Convergences, and I compiled a couple of other tips that I wanted to go through. So there's a total of 55 tips and tricks, and I'll get through as many as I can. So we're going to start today in Dynamics GP in the administration area page. The first tip is related to users. So when you're in the user setup window, in order to make a change, to add a new user, or to make any changes, or even to delete a user or change the status to inactive, you need to be signed into GP as the SA because that is the user who is allowed to update the SQL tables in the back end with this user security. Another good tip in this window is that you can use the copy settings button. So for example, I believe I have a user here called Georgia, and I can click the copy settings and copy from another user. And also I can, in some of the newest versions of GP, I can copy the home page content, the area pages from either the same user that I'm copying the security access, or from a different user. So I have those capabilities. And what the copy from security access does is it will copy the user's company security. So it copies all the access for the companies that the user has access to. And it also copies all of the security roles that are set up in each company from the user security menu. So that's just a quick way to add a new user, is to make sure that you have another user that was similar to that, and you can then copy all the security. And that is one reason why in some of the newer versions of GP, we will mark a user as being inactive instead of actually deleting the user, so that we can have that user as to give the ability to copy to a new user. That's especially helpful if you have a new employee, and after somebody has left the company and you want to copy the old employee's security to the new one. The other item in this window is the summary button. This is also in some of the newer versions of GP. It will show you how many active users, limited users, and self-service users that you're allowed based on your registration with Microsoft, and how many people are currently signed in as each one of those user types. It also shows you a list of the users and their status and the type, whether they're a full user, a limited user, or a self-service user. One other item in this window is this payroll view for human resources. If you have both payroll and human resources installed, you should seriously consider marking this box for users that can access payroll and human resources. And it's used when you're doing the payroll benefits and deductions specifically, as well as other things where payroll and human resources share similar concepts. Okay, so we're going to move on to the security tasks and security roles. I'm only going to go into the security roles to discuss this particular option. But in the security roles, you will notice that there are a lot that have an asterisk after the name or the role ID. And those are the ones that Microsoft has supplied with GP, anything that has an asterisk after it. So if you have a security role that Microsoft provided that is similar to what you want, but not 100% what you want, you can create a new role ID. And this same functionality is available in the security tasks. And then you can copy from an existing role. So all I do is just pick the security role that I want to copy from, AP clerk. And let's say I can also check this box to display the selected tasks. And if I wanted them to have everything except customer-vendor relationships, I could just uncheck this box. And so now I have a new role that had the same thing as the AP clerk, except they couldn't do the functionality for the customer-vendor task. And as I said, you can do the same thing in the security tasks window. There's a copy button. In the when you're setting up user security, a functionality that's available in here is the ability to set up a user in one company and then copy it to any other user or any other company where that user has access. In addition, I wanted to cover SmartLists that are built in either SmartList Builder and SmartList Designer. Anytime that you're building a new SmartList, users who do not have the power user security role will not be able to access that SmartList. So what I normally do is I will start out in the user security for the user that can't see a new SmartList, and I find a security role that is similar to where I would want to put the new SmartList that I designed. So for example, if I had this person set up to be an AP clerk and my new SmartList was related to accounts payable or vendors, I would start out by double-clicking the accounts payable clerk role and looking to see what tasks are included in this. And let's say that it was related to some type of purchasing report, then I can double-click the purchasing reports, and this is where I would add my new SmartList. So in adding a new SmartList to a security task, you're always going to go into the product called SmartList, and then the type is a SmartList object, and the series is a SmartList object, and you'll see here's all my SmartLists that I would find if I went in to look at the SmartList. So this is one that I created, so I'm just going to check the box, and now this user or any user that had that task, report purchasing 001 task, would be able to get into that SmartList. Also, when you're changing a security task or a security role, you know, what tasks are assigned to a security role, you do not have to have the user sign out of GP and then sign back in order to see the new changes that you made. However, if I changed this user to not have power user authority and only have AP clerk, if that user was signed in, I would need them to sign out and sign back in before they saw the changes to their security. Okay, so the next thing we're going to go on to is in user preferences. So to get to user preferences, you click the GP button and go down to user preferences. And these are based on the user ID that's signed into GP. And the things to note here are that they can first of all change whether they're seeing an action pane, which is the way the windows look now, or a menu bar, which is how the windows in older versions of GP used to display, or an action pane strip, which is slightly different than this. There are some windows in GP where you can only see all of the options if you have the menu bar set up. And I don't remember what all those windows are, but I know that there are still some where they didn't add one of the functionalities to the menu or to the action pane. So you have to sometimes turn the menu bar on in order to access certain options within a window. Also to note is that the default sales document type is here. So when the user is in sales transaction entry, if they always enter orders, they can change this to order. And that will allow them to get into when they go into sales transaction entry, they would be able to just go in and be at the type of order right away. Another option to discuss in here is that you can set up to either default reports to the printer or the screen or both. I have both marked here. And that is just where the printers will default when you go to print a report each time. Also, the autocomplete is sometimes overlooked. And in the autocomplete, you can go through entries that are complete if you have them. If you wanted a user to start out fresh, you set up complete for you can go work this questions, and you could different and use after use for so that any okay, so that brings us to batch recovery, and there are certain the routine section posted again. However, there are some and there are times when a batch is completely stuck, and when you try to click continue, it'll just keep telling you that there's an edit required. When that happens, you do need to contact our support team so that we can go into the back end in the SQL tables and determine what's wrong with the batch and fix it for you. Another thing that happens is sometimes a batch will become marked, and it just says when you look up in the batch window, it just shows that the batch is marked. And a lot of times we get support cases where people will ask us to go in to the back end SQL tables and unmark the batch. But really, when it's marked, you can usually unmark it yourself. You can do it either through the master posting or the series posting. And when you go in, you'll see, like, here's one that says it's marked. All I have to do is unmark it and click redisplay, and then close this, and the batch will be available. If I went back in and I saw that the batch still showed as being marked here instead of available, that's when I would need to contact support to have our team go in and fix the batch. But usually when batches are just marked, it's an easy, quick fix for you to unmark them yourselves. Another option within the administration area page is under the utilities. You can go in and look at the user activity and see who was signed in, the date they signed in, and the time they signed in. In addition, if there are users that have been in the system for quite a number of days, you can highlight the user and click delete, and it will remove the user from the GP activity table. And one thing to note about that is that it only removes the user one table within GP. And there are actually 4 different temporary activity tables may hold data related to that user sign-in. So even though you remove them, you still might need our support team to go in and remove them from the other tables instead, so that you can either process a batch or get a transaction working that the user may have been in and sitting in the window. So that brings up a really good topic, that users should not sit in GP for a long time where they have windows open, especially when they have a batch or a transaction selected. Because if the user leaves those open for like overnight, and somebody had to do some type of routine in GP where they needed all users out of the system, they may have removed the user from there, and it could have left a batch stuck or a transaction stuck in the process. So it's always a good idea for users to be sure all the windows are closed that they're in, and that they sign out of GP at the end of the day. And one way they could close all the windows is to click the Microsoft GP button and click the button Close All Windows. And that will close all the windows that they're in and give them the appropriate messages if they need to save a transaction or a batch. All right, we're gonna next talk about some professional services tools. The professional services tools are available to anybody who has GP, and they are a separate install. So if you do not have them, then we could potentially install them for you, depending upon your version of GP. Sometimes you'll see in the home page in this area here that there is a link to get into the professional services tools. In the newer versions of GP, they actually have a little button down here called PSTL that goes into the professional services tool menu. And when you click this button, this is the library of all the tools that are available. So some of the ones that I wanted to highlight are the copy company, or company copy. And what the company copy tool is useful for is if you need to have a new company in GP and you want it to have the same master data and setup data that another company has, but without all the transactions. So you can use this copy company tool, and basically I just marked the radio button that I'm going to use it and click the next button, and it brings up the window for that. And I type in what the source company is and what the destination company is. I can't remember what my other company is. Anyway, I type those in, and then I mark what I want to copy. And you'll see it automatically is going to copy company and financial data. Those are the two things that you have to copy. All the rest are up to you whether you copy them or not. Things to note when you do make the copy is, although it will copy the data, if you're copying the company and financial data, it will copy all of the fiscal periods. So you may need to go in and delete older fiscal periods that are, or years that are not going to be used in the new company, and then just set up the new fiscal year that you're going to be using. It also will copy all the budgets, and it will copy any quick journals, and sometimes those need to be deleted and re-entered for the new company. There are some other kind of tips around this, and I did write an article that described some of the other things that you have to be careful of when you use this tool. One other thing about the professional services tools is that they only work in the basic GP modules. They do not work for third-party products. So that is sometimes, it's sometimes needed that you can't use these because you have a third-party product where the tool won't work. Another tool that's good to use is called Doc Date Verify. It's this one. And when I have Doc Date Verify turned on, GP will check every single date that you're entering to make sure that it's within a current period, not just the posting dates. It's whatever document dates you're entering. Also, another one that's useful is this under the sales order processing, to use the SOP PO number check. And what that does is if you have customers that are sending you POs, it will make sure that you don't duplicate a PO number in a sales order. And with this one, and also the Doc Date Verify, you can turn these on and off whenever you want. They're not, you know, when they're the box is marked for them to be turned on, that's when they work, and when the box isn't marked, they don't work. And the professional services tools need to be installed on every computer where GP is installed, or these won't work on ones where the professional services tools are not installed. One other thing that's interesting is if you're entering a transaction, let's just go into purchase order or purchasing transaction entry. When you're entering a date, if I'm in the date field and I type in 15, GP knows it's the current month and the current year. So you can speed up your date entry if you're within the same month just by entering the date, the day of the month. If you need to enter a month and day that's different, but you're in the same fiscal year, you could enter that as well. 0515, it's going to know that it's this year, so it'll use the current year. Also within GP, we have the ability to do the right click. So in here, I can right click and I have insert row, delete row on these windows that have we call them scrolling windows, so they have multiple entries within the window. I can also paste and copy. So one thing that is really useful is if you want a distribution reference to go into many distributions, you can type it in and then highlight it, right click and copy, and then go down to the next row and right click and paste. Or you could also use Control C to copy and Control V to paste. Another thing that's useful is when you have entries that you're making. For example, when I start typing in A in the vendor ID, I get a full list of everything else I've ever typed. Well, if I typed like this one, ACKE001, and I know that's not a vendor, so I had actually typed it incorrectly at some point in time, that auto-complete is saving this. And if I don't want it to show up anymore, I can right-click and say Remove from List. So that vendor is never going to show up anymore in the vendor ID field. That's how you clean up the auto-complete entries. Custom links are another thing that I can do. So if I go to the Tools, Setup, Company, and then Custom Link, I can add any custom link that I want in here, and this is for my internet addresses. So if I say New, basically what I'm doing is in any of these windows, for example, in the employee, I can set up a and tell it what type, what address it is, and then what type of a link field I'm creating. So let's say I'm creating another user defined. So it's going to change my user defined one to say new link field. And this is related to the internet information. So if I go into cards, payroll, employee, pick an employee, when I go to this internet addresses, well, it used to work, so I guess I need to work more on that one, but it's supposed to show up in this internet information window. I'll come back to that. If you have questions, I can get more information on that one. In the company setup window, I can set up a company which has, let's say I've got a test company, and I want to be sure users know they're in the test company. So what I can do is under the company setup window, I just need to be sure that my company name in here says, has test as the company name. And that's done when we're setting up the actual company. We can actually put test in capital letters with the two brackets around it. So it would look like this. That. And that would indicate that I'm in a test company, and that's why you would get a message when you're signing into the company saying that you're in the test company. It knows that based on this little functionality here. Also, every single window in GP has a help button, and if you click help about this window, it will tell you more information about the window, And then you can go into the fields and see what every field does, what you should enter into the field, and you could even print the help if you needed to. The overview also usually provides links into other sections of the help. Okay, the next one is just about navigation lists. So within, let's say, the purchasing area, we do have the ability to go into like payables transactions. And within this navigation area, it will show me all of the payables transactions. And then I can do certain things within there. It decides to come up. Right, so there are certain fields where if I mark certain boxes within the navigation list, I would be able to print out or do specific options. Like in the vendors, I can actually mark vendors as being inactive, so I could check mark a bunch of vendors in a row, maybe after I've searched for them by vendor class, and then change their settings so that they're inactive. And in this particular window, if I mark different invoices, it's going to let me delete or put a hold on the invoice so you can't pay it. And it would do all of the ones that I mark on here. And each one of these navigation panes has different options. Another thing that we can do within GP in the home page is we can have different quick links. And the quick links can be either to internal windows or to an external website. So if I go in here and just say that I want to change the details and add, these are the capabilities that I have to add. So I can go to an external file, maybe an Excel spreadsheet or something. When I do that, I give it a name and then find the file that I want to go to. And then when I click on the link in the quick links button or section, after I have that set up, then I can it'll just open Excel and go into that link. And these are all for each user. So each user can have their own quick links. Another thing that people sometimes forget is that in a SmartList, you can actually rename a SmartList column. So if I am in the account transactions here, and let's say I don't really like that this says source document, I can click columns, and in this display name, I can change this to just say document number, and that will change that column name. And then I'd have to save that as a favorite in order for that to change. Also in the SmartList, I'm going to go down into the vendor SmartList. There is a way to use wildcards in SmartList if there are things that you're looking for that you can't just do in a search where you have a is between, because then you get different things. So I have a link in the download on number 18 that shows you how to get to what the different wildcards are. So for example, in this one, if I say where a vendor ID begins with, and then I have a bracket, and I say it's, I say it's A, comma, B, comma, C, comma, E, and then an outside bracket, And then I also want to see where the city is equal to anything that that is not in a C. I would do this with the little caret top. Let's see. And this is going to show me all my vendors that are A, B, C, and E, where the city doesn't start with a C. So those are some little tricks you can do. And the list, the 4 that you can use are a percent to symbol, which means that it would contain 0 or more characters, where you type in what character it starts with, say, and then a percent means anything after that is okay. An underscore means that you're going to replace one character. So if I had so if I did this where I had C percent or percent, like that, it would say anything that is before the G and E and anything after is okay, where it contains that. And if I did this where I type G underscore E, it would say anything that is G underscore G, any letter in the second, and E afterwards. If I have a bracket and then a list of letters or numbers, it would say any of these 3. Use that. It's actually the bracket, not the other symbol I had. And then the one that is the caret top with the C means not in. All right, so that's it for that kind of overall. Now within general ledger, one thing that people sometimes forget about is that if you have a journal entry that you entered incorrectly, you can go into the correction and either do a back out or a back out and create a correcting entry. So the back out, basically you enter the journal entry that you're backing out, and it will pull it up into the, once you click OK, it pulls it up into the transaction entry screen, and it reverses the debits and credits. And then you can just post it or change the date or anything else you're trying to back out. If you do a back out and correcting entry, it's going to back it out just like a back out entry would do, but then it'll bring the original entry up onto the window after you post the back out portion. And that at that point, you can make any changes to the correcting entry, like maybe it was in the wrong posting date, you can change the posting date. Also, if you get an error message that you're that you can't correct a journal entry that was originating from another subsidiary ledger, there is a setting in the general ledger setup window. There's a checkbox that allows you to indicate that you want to allow that, and then you won't get that error message. So you could temporarily allow it if there was one that you needed to correct, and then go back in and unmark that box in the setup so that you didn't allow it for the future. Another useful tool in here is the ability to have the account roll-ups, and that's under the inquiry. So I have one set up where basically when you're doing this, you click, you type in what you want to look at, and it'll ask if you're setting up a new one, and it'll open up this window where you can type in column headings. You could have actuals and previous and a previous year, or you could even do a budget if you wanted. And then you can have a calculated column where in this area, if I enter that it's calculated, it will allow me to go in and enter my calculation. So for in this example, I had the current year minus last year is what my calculation is going to be. And then in the lower part, I can choose to include certain things. So in this case, I said where my department segment was equal to 0, 1. So now when I'm back in here and I click redisplay, it's going to roll up all of my accounts that have 0, 1 in my department and show me what the current year, last year, and variance is for all of those. So that's just a quick way to get an answer instead of going out and running a report from the management reporter. So we already talked about using the right click. So that's an easy thing in the transaction entry to enter a distribution reference and then copy and paste it into all the other distribution references. Another option within transaction entry is in some of the newer versions of GP, you can copy and paste from Excel. So when you copy and paste from Excel, the Excel file needs to be a specific, it needs to have specific columns in it, and then you can just copy the data that you want to paste in here, and you enter the information related to the transaction at the top of the window, and then put your cursor down in the first account number and just paste in from Excel, and it will paste in all the journal entry for you. I kind of skipped over a couple things, but while I was in that window, I thought I'd talk about that. So the next thing is related to closing a period. If I go into my period window, so in the fiscal periods, GP does provide the ability to do what they call a mass close. So in addition to being able to close individual series, let's say that I wanted to close sales and purchasing and inventory, payroll, and project. But actually in purchasing, I don't really want to close the whole module because somebody's still entering transactions. So instead I can go to mass close and change the origin here, or change the series to purchasing, and change the this to payables transaction entry, and then it will allow me to close only that module. Or I could have this marked first and do that. And when I'm in here now, this transaction entry, you'll see it's closed. I could unmark that, and when I click OK, it shows that the payables, the purchasing series is closed, but I actually opened just payables transaction entry. Another tip is related to your accounts. When you have control accounts like your cash account, your accounts payable account, your accounts receivable account, one thing that you might want to do is mark these to not allow account entry. So what that means is that when you're entering any transactions in especially general ledger and the subsidiary entries, these accounts are going to come from another area. They're going to come in from what you have set up for your checkbook in the case of the cash account, and you would not be able to enter a journal entry or any subsidiary transaction into this GL account unless you came back and marked this box. So that's a good way to prevent people from inadvertently entering journal entries against different GL accounts that you're expecting to originate from your subsidiary ledgers. Another option is, another thing to be concerned about in account maintenance is the posting type. The posting type is what's used at your year-end close for GL to determine whether to bring a balance forward entry or to, if it's a profit and loss, it'll close the account balance into the retained earnings account. So this is really important that these are set up correctly for each account, or your entries will not happen correctly at year-end close. There is a way to change the posting type after a year-end close, and I have a link included to go to that article that Microsoft has about that. But another option is in the newer versions of GP, you can actually reverse a year-end closing. So there is reverse historical year here, and this is the showing the if I had closed a year, it would show the last closing date, and that's the year that I'd be reversing. In order to reverse a year-end close, everybody has to be out of GP. They have to be out of all companies. So that's one thing to consider if you ever need to do it. Another kind of overlooked feature is this reconcile to GL. And in some versions of GP, it's only available in payables and receivables. But in more recent versions, they added inventory and bank reconciliation. And basically what it does is it creates an Excel spreadsheet that will show you matched entries that you don't need to worry about, that are matched between the subsidiary and the GL, and it will show you another one that's unmatched. And the unmatched entries are the ones that you need to look at to see if someone entered a journal entry to the control account, or something other happened. One thing to note is on those reconciled to GL Excel spreadsheets, sometimes the beginning balances and the ending balances are not correct on there, and Microsoft has stated that that's just an issue that happens with those. So really the only thing you should be concerned about are the unmatched entries and the potentially matched entries. Okay. And then in the SmartList, one thing I wanted to note in the SmartList is that if I go into the financial SmartList and look at the account transactions, I can add in columns that say originating. And any of these originating columns, like the document number, the master name, the master ID, the originating source, all of those are coming from the subsidiary ledger, and will tell you, for example, from the payables, the master ID would be your vendor ID and vendor name for the master name, and the document number would be the voucher number or the payment number. So those are really useful if you're trying to do some things within general ledger to find out where the transactions came from and what document they're related to. In bank reconciliation, one thing in the bank reconciliation that you can do is get a list of any unreconciled transactions. And that is useful if you're trying to find what checks haven't gone through the bank reconcile or deposits even. And the way I did this is I did add some columns in to the original bank transactions SmartList. And then in the search, I searched for a specific checkbook ID, and I looked for anything that was not voided and anything that was not reconciled. If you have auditors that want to see all checks, even the ones that for some reason you had to void outside the system, like say you had a check number that got damaged before you even put it in the printer, and you need to get it in the system to make sure that all your checks are in order. You can go into the bank transaction entry window, pick a checkbook, and leave the number, type in whatever the number is, and then click post. And this will post into the checkbook what that check number was with no amount in it. You'll see when I print this out, it will tell me that there are errors, or it will look like it's actually not even there, but it actually does create that check out in the system, but only in bank transaction entry. Another thing to be aware of is in some of the newer versions of GP, if I go into the tools, setup, company, and then go into options, this last option was added to automatically post cash receipt deposits. What that means is when I enter a cash receipt in a batch and post the batch, it's going to automatically create the deposit in the bank deposit. So I don't have to go into bank deposits and create a deposit like I used to in some of the older versions of GP. So that's one of the nicer new features that they added, and I can't remember what version they added that into, but it's good to have. All right, so we're going to try and move. I see it's already 5 till, and we haven't even gotten into payables. So I only got through 30 of my tips, but what you can do is just look through some of the ways, some of the other tips that are listed, and if you don't know what I mean about them, you can always email us and ask, what are these other tips, explain them or whatever, and I'll send you an email to let you know what I meant.